He was 67 years old, standing in a parking lot, holding a letter his landlord had just raised his rent by $640 a month. Not a typo. $640, on top of what he was already paying. His Social Security check was $1,740. His rent, before the hike, was $1,100. After groceries, his medication, and his phone bill, he had roughly $180 left every single month. And now his landlord wanted $640 more. Within 8 months, he was living rent-free. No landlord, no lease, no more letters. Just him, a wood stove crackling in the corner, and a home he built with his own 2 hands, sitting on a trailer in the middle of a snow-covered field. Fully his, completely paid for, and it cost him less than a used pickup truck. This is not a fantasy. This is not some fringe internet movement for young minimalists with trust funds. This is a quiet revolution happening right now in rural counties and suburban backyards across America. Thousands of men, retirees, widowers, divorced men in their 60s and 70s are escaping the rental market permanently, not by winning the lottery, not by moving in with their kids, by doing something so simple, so radical, and so effective that once you understand it, you will never look at housing the same way again. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how this works, what it costs, what the real traps are, and why the men doing this are some of the smartest people in the room. Let us start with the crisis, because without understanding how bad it is, none of the rest of this makes sense. The average Social Security retirement benefit in the United States right now is $1,907 a month. That sounds like a number. Here is what that number actually means in real life. The Department of Housing and Urban Development defines affordable housing as housing that costs no more than 30% of your income. 30% of $1,907 is $572 a month. Find me an apartment in America, anywhere, for $572 a month. Go ahead. I will wait. You cannot, because the national median rent for a 1-bedroom apartment is now $1,500. In cities like Denver, Austin, Miami, or Portland, it is closer to $1,900, which means rent alone consumes your entire Social Security check before you buy a single egg. And it gets worse. Between 2019 and 2024, rents across the United States rose by an average of 31%, not gradually, 31% in 5 years. Meanwhile, Social Security cost of living adjustments averaged around 4% annually during that same period. The gap between what seniors earn and what housing costs is not closing. It is accelerating. The result is a demographic catastrophe that almost nobody is talking about loudly enough. The number of Americans over 65 who are considered housing cost burden, meaning they spend more than 30% of their income on rent, has more than doubled in the last 15 years. We are talking about millions of men who did everything right. They worked, they paid taxes, they raised families, and now, in the final chapter of their lives, they are one rent hike away from crisis, and the traditional solutions are failing them. Subsidized housing has waiting lists that stretch 3 to 7 years in most major cities. Moving in with adult children means giving up independence, and often creates tension that damages those relationships. Assisted living facilities cost anywhere from $4,000 to $9,000 per month. Nursing homes cost more, and the rental market, as we just established, is simply out of reach. So what do you do when every door in the system is locked? You stop knocking on doors. You build your own. Here's the core idea, and it is simpler than you think. A tiny home on wheels is legally classified in most of the United States as a recreational vehicle, not a house, not a permanent structure, a vehicle. That one legal distinction changes everything, because vehicles are not subject to property taxes. They are not subject to most building codes. They do not require a foundation, a sewer hookup, or a building permit in most jurisdictions. You can build one, title it, and park it on a family member's property, in an RV park, on rural land, and live in it full time. The average cost to build a solid, livable tiny home on a trailer is between $15,000 and $45,000, depending on size, materials, and how much of the work you do yourself. The man in that parking lot with the rent hike letter? He built his for $22,000. He used reclaimed lumber, salvage windows, and a second-hand wood stove he found on Facebook Marketplace for $200. His monthly cost of living after the bill dropped to under $400. That includes his phone, his propane, his internet, and his food. His Social Security check now covers all of it, and he banks the rest. Compare that to renting. If he had continued renting at his previous rate of $1,100 a month, he would spend $132,000 in 10 years on housing alone. And at the end of those 10 years, he would own exactly nothing. With his tiny home, he spent $22,000 once. He owns it outright, and it has value. He could sell it tomorrow for more than he paid to build it. The math is not complicated. The math is devastating in how obvious it is. Now, you might be wondering about the build itself. What does it actually take to construct one of these? Do you need to be a master carpenter? Do you need a full wood shop? The answer might surprise you. Most of the men building these homes right now had zero professional construction experience before they started. What they had was time, determination, and YouTube. Seriously, the tiny home building community online is one of the most generous and detailed knowledge-sharing ecosystems on the internet. Channels with hundreds of step-by-step build videos. Forums where experienced builders answer questions within hours. Facebook groups with tens of thousands of members who will walk a first-timer through every single stage. The basic skills required are measuring and cutting lumber, basic framing, roofing, basic electrical wiring, and installing a heating source. None of these require a professional license to learn. All of them can be self-taught. Local community colleges in most states offer short courses in framing, electrical basics, and plumbing for under $300. Some areas have maker spaces, community workshops with professional tools that men can access for $50 to $100 a month. A typical build timeline for a first-timer working part-time is 6 to 12 months. Working full-time, focused, and organized, men have completed solid builds in as little as 14 weeks. The process is intense. It is physical. And every single man who has done it says the same thing. Building it yourself makes it feel like yours a way that no purchased home ever could. There is something that happens to a man when he frames his first wall, when he watches the skeleton of a structure rise from a flat trailer bed, when he installs a window and stands back and realizes, I did that. That is mine. No bank owns it. No landlord can take it. Nobody can raise the price on it. It is one of the most powerful psychological experiences available to a human being, and it is especially powerful for men who spent decades in careers where they built things for other people. Now let us talk about the reality that most videos in this space gloss over. The winter problem. That smokestack in the thumbnail is not decoration. It is a wood stove chimney, and it is there for a reason. Tiny homes on wheels are small structures, and small structures lose heat fast. If you are planning to live full-time in a cold climate, anywhere that drops below freezing regularly, your insulation and heating strategy are not optional details. They are the difference between a livable home and a dangerous one. The men doing this successfully in cold climates follow a clear set of principles. First, insulation density. Standard stick-frame tiny homes use bad insulation, the pink fluffy stuff you see in walls. For cold climates, that is not enough. The builders who thrive in winter use closed-cell spray foam insulation, which has an R value roughly twice that of standard bad insulation, and also acts as a vapor barrier. Yes, it costs more upfront. It pays for itself in the first winter. Second, the heating source. Wood stoves are romantic and effective, but they require you to source, split, and store wood, which is real physical labor. Propane heaters, specifically the kind designed for tight spaces with proper ventilation, are a more practical primary heat source for most men. Mini split heat pumps, which run on electricity and are surprisingly efficient even in cold weather, are becoming increasingly popular in tiny home builds. The best setups use a combination: a propane or electric primary source for consistent warmth, and a small wood stove for backup and ambience. Third, skirting. The underside of a trailer is a massive source of heat loss in winter. Experienced cold climate tiny home dwellers wrap the base of their trailer with foam board and weather-resistant skirting. This alone can cut heating costs by 20 to 30%. Men living in Minnesota, Montana, Maine, and Vermont are doing this full-time through real winters, and they are comfortable. It requires preparation and the right build. But the idea that a tiny home cannot survive a northern winter is simply not true. The homes that fail in winter are the ones built without taking winter seriously during construction. Here is where we need to slow down and be completely honest with you. The legal landscape for full-time tiny home living is the most complicated part of this entire picture, and is the part that catches people off guard if they do not do their research before they build. Here's the truth. Where you can legally park a tiny home and live in it full-time varies dramatically by state, county, and municipality. In some places, it is completely straightforward. In others, it is a maze of zoning codes, HOA restrictions, and RV ordinances that can leave a man who just spent $30,000 on a bill with nowhere to legally put it. So let's go through the real options. Option 1, family land. This is the most common setup, and in most rural counties, it is also the easiest. If a family member owns a parcel of land, even a relatively small one, many counties will allow a family member to park an RV on that land and occupy it. The key phrase is rural county. Most rural areas have minimal zoning enforcement. A man parking his tiny home on his son's 5-acre property in a rural county and hooking up to a well and septic is, in most of those jurisdictions, completely legal. This is probably the most common scenario for the men who are doing this successfully. Option 2, RV parks with permanent residency. Not all RV parks allow full-time residency. Some limit stays to a certain number of months per year. But a growing number of parks are actively marketing themselves as affordable permanent housing alternatives. Monthly rates at RV parks range from $300 to $800, depending on location and amenities. That is still dramatically less than apartment rent. And increasingly, parks designed specifically for tiny homes on wheels are being developed in states like Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and the Carolinas. Option 3, tiny home communities. These are purpose-built communities designed for people who want to live in small structures permanently. Some are 55 and older communities specifically. Monthly lot rent in these communities typically runs $400 to $700, and the communities often include shared amenities, laundry community spaces, sometimes even gardens. Several nonprofit organizations across the country are developing affordable senior-focused tiny home communities, specifically because of the housing crisis described at the start of this video. Option 4, rural land lease. For under $200 to $400 a month in many parts of the country, a man can lease a small parcel of rural land from a private landowner and place his tiny home there. This works especially well in states with minimal rural zoning. Think parts of Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, and much of the rural West. The states currently considered most permissive for full-time tiny home living include Texas, Tennessee, North Carolina, Arizona, and most of the rural Mountain West. The states with the most regulatory hurdles tend to be California, New York, and New Jersey, though even those states have pockets of permissive jurisdictions. The critical step before you build a single board is to call the county zoning office in the area where you plan to live and ask directly, "Can I park a towable RV and live in it full-time on this type of property?" Get the answer in writing if you can. Do not assume. Do not guess. Ask. There is something else happening in this movement that the numbers alone do not capture. Talk to the men who have done this, actually done it, built the home, moved in, settled into the life. And almost universally, they describe a psychological shift that they did not expect. The stress of housing insecurity, the low-grade, constant anxiety of knowing that your landlord controls your future, is something you do not fully feel until it is gone. Men describe sleeping better, feeling calmer, having energy for things they had not cared about in years. Hobbies, projects, relationships. Because when the single largest threat to your stability is removed, something opens up. There's also the identity dimension. American men, especially men of a certain generation, were raised to believe that ownership is manhood, that providing shelter is a fundamental responsibility. Being priced out of that, being forced into the position of a permanent renter with no equity and no control, does something to a man's sense of himself that is hard to articulate but impossible to ignore. Building your own home, with your own hands, on your own terms, outside the system that priced you out, is an act of reclamation. It says, "You cannot beat me at your game, so I stopped playing your game. I built my own." Men who have done this describe it as one of the most empowering experiences of their lives. Not just the financial relief, the act itself, the building, the proving, and then there is the simplicity. Tiny home living forces a reckoning with what you actually need. Most men who downsize into a tiny home spend the first few weeks uncomfortable. Too much stuff, too little space, the psychological weight of decades of accumulation. And then something shifts. They realize that most of what they own was owning them. The storage unit full of things they had not touched in 8 years. The closet full of clothes worn twice. The garage full of tools for hobbies abandoned a decade ago. When all of that is gone, what remains is what actually matters. And for most men, what actually matters fits comfortably in 200 square feet. Let's talk money one more time, because this is the part that makes this genuinely life-changing rather than just interesting. If a man builds a tiny home for $25,000 and parks it on family land or pays $400 a month in lot rent, his housing cost is essentially zero, or at worst, $400. His Social Security of $1,907 now covers his entire life with money left over. He is not scraping. He is not choosing between medication and groceries. He is, for the first time in years, financially stable. But here is the part most people miss. He now has the potential to save money. At 67, 68, 70 years old, for the first time, that savings is not going into a 401k. It is going into an emergency fund, a travel fund, a grandchildren fund, medical flexibility, the ability to say yes to life instead of calculating whether he can afford to say yes. Men have used this framework to pay off old debts, to travel in winter, towing their home behind their truck to warmer climates, to finally afford the health care they have been deferring. The tiny home is not just shelter. It is a financial reset button at an age when most people believe resets are no longer available. If you are watching this and you are thinking seriously about this path, here's exactly where to start. First, spend 2 weeks doing nothing but research before you spend a single dollar. Watch build videos. Read forums. Join the tiny home community Facebook groups. The American Tiny House Association has resources and legal guides by state. Do not rush this. The men who build poorly usually build quickly without enough planning. Second, determine your parking situation before you determine your build. Where the home will live is more important than what the home looks like. Nail down your county regulations and your land situation first. Third, set a realistic budget with a 20% contingency. Whatever you think the build will cost, plan for 20% more. Materials run over. Tools break. Plans change. The men who finish their builds are the ones who plan for reality, not the optimistic version. Fourth, start with a simple design. The biggest mistake first-time builders make is trying to build too much. A single sleeping loft, an open living and kitchen area, a small bathroom. That is a complete, comfortable, livable home. Add complexity only on your second build. And many men do build a second one better than the first. Fifth, connect with someone who has done it. One mentor, a man who has built a tiny home and lived in it, is worth 100 hours of video research. Find a local tiny home meetup. Post in a forum. Reach out to a builder in your state. The community is genuinely generous. These men want others to succeed at this. What is happening right now, quietly, in fields and family backyards and rural lots across the country, is a revolution. Not a loud one, not one with protests or hashtags. A quiet revolution, built one board at a time, by men who refuse to accept that the system had already decided their fate. They are retired teachers and former mechanics and ex-construction workers and lifelong farmers. They are men who looked at a rent hike letter or a lease renewal or a landlord's voicemail and made a decision that the rest of their lives would not be defined by someone else's price increase. They picked up tools. They learned what they did not know. They built. And on the other side of that build, they found something that most people in this country are still chasing. Not just a place to live, but a place that is entirely, irrevocably, unshakably theirs. No landlord can raise what you own. No market can price you out of your own home. No letter in a parking lot can take from you something you built with your own hands. The question is not whether this is possible. Thousands of men have already proven that it is. The question is whether you are willing to start.